The vast expanse of space stretched endlessly before the research vessel Aurora, its sleek metallic frame glinting faintly under the light of a distant star. Ethan Cross, a quiet and unassuming engineer in his mid-30s, stood at the helm of the ship's observation deck. His fingers brushed absent-mindedly against the edge of his utility belt as he gazed out into the void. It was supposed to be a routine mission, investigate a strange signal from an uncharted moon orbiting a dying planet. But something about it felt different. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled with unease. The distress call had come through late last cycle, weak and fragmented, but unmistakably artificial. Captain Rhea had ordered Ethan and 2 other crew members to prepare for landing. It could be nothing, she'd said over the comms, her voice steady but cautious. But if it's someone, or something, in trouble, we can't ignore it. Ethan wasn't one for heroics. He preferred working behind the scenes, fixing broken systems, and tinkering with machinery rather than taking center stage. Still, there was something compelling about the unknown that stirred a spark of curiosity within him. What if this was humanity's chance to make contact with another intelligent species? Or worse, what if someone, or something, was in desperate need of help? The descent onto the moon was anything but smooth. The surface was rugged and uneven, dotted with jagged rocks and patches of glowing vegetation that pulsed faintly like bioluminescent oceans. As the shuttle touched down, a thick mist swirled around them, obscuring their view. The air outside smelled metallic, tinged with an unfamiliar tang that made Ethan wrinkle his nose. "Stay alert," muttered Lieutenant Kara, the team's security officer, her hand resting on the hilt of her plasma pistol. She scanned the area cautiously while Ethan adjusted the settings on his portable scanner. The device hummed softly as it analyzed the environment, searching for signs of life or energy signatures. It didn't take long for Ethan to pick up on something unusual. A faint trail of residual heat led deeper into the terrain, winding between towering crystalline formations that shimmered like glass. Following the trail, the group soon stumbled upon the wreckage of an alien spacecraft half buried in the glowing plants. Its hull was scorched and cracked, with tendrils of smoke curling lazily into the air. The design was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Smooth curves blended seamlessly with sharp angles, suggesting advanced technology far beyond human capabilities. "Looks like they didn't stand a chance," Kara murmured grimly, kicking aside a piece of debris. But Ethan noticed something amid the destruction. Movement, faint, almost imperceptible, but definitely there. Squinting through the haze, he spotted 4 figures slumped inside the remains of the cockpit. "Hold on," he called out, rushing forward despite Kara's protests. Carefully navigating the unstable wreckage, Ethan reached the cockpit and found himself face to face with beings straight out of a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Their appearances were wildly different from one another, yet each radiated an aura of fragility and pain. One had shimmering blue skin and delicate fins along her arms. Another was covered in crimson scales that gleamed dully even in the dim light. A third figure lay curled up, her body adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to glow softly. And the fourth, well, she looked like shifting clouds of light, her form constantly changing shape. Ethan's heart clenched at the sight of them. They were injured, some more severely than others, and clearly unconscious. Without hesitation, he began assessing their conditions using the rudimentary medical kit strapped to his side. The scaled woman had deep lacerations across her torso, while the aquatic-looking being appeared to be struggling to breathe. The glowing patterned alien had burns covering most of her exposed skin, and the shapeshifter's form flickered erratically, as though losing cohesion. Kara radioed back to the Aurora for additional supplies, but Ethan knew time was critical. Working quickly, he fashioned makeshift splints and bandages from available materials, stabilizing fractures and sealing wounds as best he could. For the aquatic alien, he rigged a small oxygenator using parts from his toolkit, ensuring she could breathe properly. Every second counted, and sweat dripped down his brow as he focused intently on saving these strangers who couldn't even thank him. Hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. By the time reinforcements arrived, Ethan had managed to stabilize all 4 aliens, though barely. Exhausted but determined, he watched silently as the survivors were carefully loaded onto stretchers and carried back to the shuttle. As he climbed aboard alongside them, a strange sense of pride welled up within him. These beings were not human, but they were alive, and somehow he had played a part in keeping them that way. Little did Ethan know, this act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would change his life, and theirs, forever. The hum of the medical bay aboard the Aurora was a constant, soothing backdrop as Ethan sat by the bedside of the 4 alien survivors. It had been 2 days since their rescue, and though they were stable, none of them had regained consciousness yet. The ship's doctors monitored their vitals closely, but much about their biology remained a mystery. Without clear communication or detailed knowledge of their species, everyone aboard could only guess what might happen next. Ethan spent most of his time in the medical bay, tinkering with broken equipment while keeping an eye on the aliens. He didn't know why he felt so drawn to them. It wasn't just curiosity or duty. There was something deeper, almost instinctual, that made him want to stay close. Perhaps it was because saving them had been such a personal effort, one that pushed him beyond his usual limits. Or maybe it was simply the realization that these beings were far from home, injured and vulnerable, and deserved care and understanding. On the 3rd morning, the first signs of movement came from the aquatic alien. Her shimmering blue skin rippled faintly as her eyes fluttered open. At first, she seemed disoriented, her gaze darting around the unfamiliar surroundings. When her luminous golden eyes finally landed on Ethan, she tilted her head slightly, studying him with quiet intensity. Ethan froze, unsure how to react. Would she be frightened, angry, hostile? Instead, she reached out a trembling hand toward him. Hesitantly, Ethan extended his own, letting her cool fingers brush against his palm. To his surprise, images flooded his mind, flashes of stars, crashing waves, and the sensation of flight. She wasn't speaking aloud, but somehow she was communicating telepathically. Though fragmented and unclear, her message was simple: gratitude. Over the next few hours, the other 3 began to awaken as well. Each reaction was unique. The scaled warrior with crimson skin groaned loudly as she sat up, clutching her side where her wounds had been treated. Her sharp green eyes narrowed suspiciously at Ethan, but when she noticed the bandages wrapped carefully around her torso, her expression softened. With a low growl that sounded more like approval than anger, she gave him a curt nod. The glowing pattern scientist stirred quietly, her bioluminescent markings flickering weakly as she opened her large almond-shaped eyes. Unlike the others, she didn't seem alarmed by her surroundings. Instead, she immediately started examining the nearby medical equipment, her fascination evident even through her exhaustion. When Ethan handed her a small device he'd been repairing, her lips curved into a shy smile, and she began gesturing animatedly, trying to explain its potential uses despite the language barrier. The 4th alien, the shapeshifter, was the hardest to read. Her form shifted erratically between shapes, sometimes resembling a humanoid figure, other times dissolving into amorphous clouds of light. Ethan suspected this instability was due to her injuries, but there was no way to confirm it without proper diagnostics. Despite her unpredictable appearance, she radiated warmth and playfulness, often mimicking objects in the room to elicit laughter from the crew. One moment she'd transform into a floating orb, the next into a miniature version of Ethan himself, complete with his scruffy beard and tired eyes. As the days passed, attempts at communication became more frequent. The aliens couldn't speak human languages, nor could Ethan understand theirs, but they found ways to bridge the gap. The aquatic being, whom they eventually named Lyra, used her telepathic abilities to share memories and emotions. Through her, Ethan learned fragments of their journey before the crash, fleeing danger, seeking refuge, and ultimately failing to escape pursuit. Gennara, the scaled warrior, communicated primarily through gestures and expressions. She was fiercely protective of her companions, often positioning herself between them and any perceived threat. Yet beneath her tough exterior, Ethan sensed vulnerability. Once, during a quiet moment, he caught her staring wistfully at a holographic image of her homeworld displayed on a tablet. Her eyes glistened with unused tears, and Ethan realized she carried the weight of loss just as heavily as anyone else. Kayla, the glowing pattern scientist, proved to be endlessly curious. She spent hours poring over Ethan's tools and gadgets, marveling at Earth's technology. In return, she shared snippets of her own advanced knowledge, using crude drawings and demonstrations to explain concepts like energy manipulation and quantum fields. Ethan found himself learning as much from her as she did from him, their mutual passion for discovery creating an unspoken bond. Tessa, the shapeshifter, brought levity to the group. Her antics kept spirits high, especially when tensions ran thin. Whether transforming into comical animals or reenacting scenes from the crash, much to Venera's exasperation, she reminded everyone that laughter could heal wounds words alone couldn't touch. But beneath her playful exterior lay a deep sense of loyalty. On several occasions, Ethan observed her subtly guarding the others, shifting into defensive forms whenever strangers entered the room. Despite their differences, the four aliens shared one undeniable truth. They trusted Ethan, not because he was extraordinary or heroic, but because he had shown them kindness when they needed it most. That trust grew stronger with each passing day, forging connections that transcended species and culture. One evening, as Ethan worked on calibrating a translator device, Lyra approached him. Placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, she projected another series of images into his mind. This time of her people celebrating unity and friendship. Ethan smiled softly, understanding the sentiment. "We're all in this together," he murmured, patting her hand reassuringly. Though none of them could fully articulate it yet, a profound bond had formed among the five of them. A bond built on survival, compassion, and hope. And as they continued to recover aboard the Aurora, they began to realize that their destinies were intertwined in ways none of them could have foreseen. The Aurora hummed steadily as it orbited the mysterious moon, its crew going about their daily routines. Ethan had spent nearly a week helping the four alien survivors recover, and though they were growing stronger by the day, something continued to weigh heavily on his mind. The distress signal that led them here, it hadn't been random. Something about it felt deliberate, almost too perfect in its timing and placement. As much as he wanted to dismiss the thought, his instincts told him otherwise. One evening, while the rest of the ship's crew was occupied with routine maintenance, Ethan decided to dig deeper. He slipped into the communications bay, where fragments of the original distress call were still stored in the system. Pulling up the data logs, he began analyzing the transmission using tools he'd modified himself. At first glance, it appeared chaotic, a jumble of frequencies and encrypted bursts. But as he filtered out the noise, patterns began to emerge. What Ethan discovered sent a chill down his spine. Hidden within the signal was a coded message written in an unfamiliar script. With Kayla's help, her glowing patterned hands dancing over the console as she deciphered sections of the code, they pieced together fragments of information. The message wasn't a plea for help. It was a lure. Someone, or something, had intentionally broadcast the signal to draw unsuspecting travelers to this remote moon. Before Ethan could process the implications, alarms blared throughout the ship. Red warning lights flashed as Lieutenant Kara's voice crackled over the intercom. Unidentified vessels approaching. All hands to battle stations. Ethan rushed back to the medical bay, heart pounding. The four aliens were already awake, their expressions tense and alert. Lyra's telepathic abilities picked up on the commotion even before the alarm sounded, and she projected flashes of concern into Ethan's mind. Venera stood protectively in front of her companions, her crimson scales glinting menacingly under the flickering lights. Kayla clutched a small energy device she'd been tinkering with, ready to defend herself if necessary. Tessa shifted into a hazy, translucent form, her body rippling like water as she prepared to adapt to whatever threat came their way. Through the viewport, Ethan caught sight of sleek, angular ships descending toward the moon's surface. Their design was unmistakable. The same insignia etched onto their hulls matched the fragmented images Kayla had decoded earlier. These weren't rescuers or explorers. They were hunters. "The Dominion," Kayla whispered, her voice trembling. She turned to Ethan, her bioluminescent markings pulsing rapidly. "They found us." Ethan's stomach sank. From what little he understood through Lyra's telepathic memories, the Dominion was a ruthless empire that sought to eliminate anyone deemed genetically impure. Hybrid beings like Kayla and Tessa were prime targets, seen as abominations by the Empire's rigid hierarchy. Now, they weren't just dealing with a crash landing. They were facing an existential threat. "We need to move," Ethan said firmly, grabbing a nearby toolkit. "If we stay here, we're sitting ducks." Venera nodded sharply, her green eyes blazing with determination. "Lead the way, human." With no time to waste, Ethan led the group through the ship's labyrinthine corridors, avoiding main thoroughfares where Dominion forces might already be breaching. The aliens followed closely behind, each contributing their unique strengths to the escape plan. Lyra used her telepathy to sense nearby threats, guiding them away from danger zones. Kayla hacked into the ship's systems, disabling security doors and rerouting power to create diversions. Venera took point, her muscular frame bristling with readiness to confront any enemy head-on. And Tessa floated silently ahead, scouting narrow passages and transforming into smaller forms to slip through tight spaces. Their path eventually led them to one of the Aurora's auxiliary shuttles, tucked away in a rarely used docking bay. Ethan quickly set to work prepping the craft for launch, his fingers flying over the controls as sweat dripped down his forehead. Meanwhile, the others kept watch, their heightened senses alert for any sign of pursuit. Just as Ethan finished the final checks, heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. A squad of Dominion soldiers appeared, clad in black armor and wielding weapons that emitted a low, ominous hum. Venera stepped forward without hesitation, letting out a guttural roar as she charged at the nearest soldier. Her sheer ferocity caught them off guard, giving Ethan precious seconds to activate the shuttle's engines. "Get inside," Ethan shouted, waving frantically at the others. Kayla darted past him, clutching her energy device tightly. Lyra followed close behind, her fins shimmering faintly as she moved gracefully despite her injuries. Tessa transformed into a streak of light, zipping into the shuttle mere moments before Venera leaped aboard, slamming the hatch shut behind her. As the shuttle detached from the Aurora, explosions erupted across the larger vessel. The Dominion forces were relentless, firing upon the fleeing craft with precision. Ethan gripped the controls tightly, navigating through a hail of laser fire as the moon's jagged terrain loomed ahead. His heart raced as he guided the shuttle into a narrow canyon, hoping the rocky walls would provide cover. For several tense minutes, they zigzagged through the treacherous landscape, dodging both enemy fire and natural hazards. Finally, the sounds of pursuit faded, replaced by the eerie silence of the moon's wilderness. Ethan exhaled deeply, slumping back in his seat as the reality of their situation hit him. They were alive, for now, but stranded on a hostile world with no allies and limited resources. Lyra placed a comforting hand on Ethan's shoulder, projecting waves of calm into his mind. Venera crossed her arms, her expression grim but resolute. Kayla examined the shuttle systems, already brainstorming ways to repair and upgrade them. And Tessa floated gently beside Ethan, her shifting form glowing softly in the dim light. Though the immediate danger had passed, Ethan knew they couldn't afford to rest. The Dominion wouldn't give up easily, and their survival depended on staying one step ahead. But as he looked at the 4 aliens who trusted him implicitly, he realized something important. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were a team. And together, they stood a fighting chance. The shuttle touched down in a secluded valley surrounded by towering crystalline formations, their jagged edges glinting faintly under the moon's dim light. Ethan stepped out cautiously, scanning the area for signs of immediate danger. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of glowing vegetation swaying in the breeze. Behind him, the four aliens emerged from the craft, each carrying what little supplies they had salvaged during their frantic escape. "This place feels wrong," Kayla murmured, her bioluminescent patterns flickering nervously as she adjusted the strap of her makeshift satchel. Her glowing eyes darted around, taking in the alien landscape that seemed alive yet eerily desolate. Ethan nodded grimly. "We'll need to stay hidden until we figure out our next move." He glanced at the others, noting their weary expressions and battered forms. They were far from safe. But for now, this isolated spot would have to do. The first challenge came almost immediately. As they ventured deeper into the valley to gather resources, they encountered a river unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Its waters shimmered with an unnatural iridescence, reflecting colors that shifted and danced like liquid rainbows. But when Tessa dipped her hand into the stream experimentally, her translucent form began to bubble and distort painfully. "It's acidic," Lyra exclaimed telepathically, projecting images of corroded rocks and dead plants into everyone's minds. The aquatic alien pointed toward a cluster of vines hanging overhead, suggesting they use those instead. Working together, Venera used her strength to tear down the thick vines, while Kayla fashioned them into sturdy ropes. Together, they constructed a makeshift bridge, allowing them to cross safely. Despite such close calls, moments of camaraderie began to emerge. During breaks, Tessa entertained the group by transforming into whimsical shapes. A floating orb one moment, a miniature version of Venera the next. Even the usually stoic warrior couldn't suppress a chuckle when Tessa mimicked her scowl perfectly. These small interactions helped lighten the oppressive weight of their situation, reminding them that laughter could be as vital as food or shelter. Days turned into weeks as the group adapted to life on the hostile moon. Each day brought new challenges, forcing them to rely on each other's unique abilities. One particularly harrowing incident occurred when they stumbled upon a pack of predatory creatures lurking near their makeshift camp. The beasts resembled giant insectoids with razor-sharp mandibles and glowing red eyes. When one lunged at Kayla, Venera sprang into action without hesitation, tackling the creature midair and snapping its neck with brute force. But it wasn't just physical threats they faced. The environment itself tested their resolve. Acidic rivers weren't the only hazard. There were fields of spore-like plants that released hallucinogenic gases when disturbed. On one occasion, Ethan accidentally triggered a cloud of these spores, causing vivid illusions to overwhelm his senses. It was Lyra who guided him back to reality, using her telepathy to anchor his mind and pull him out of the haze. Through all these trials, Ethan found himself growing closer to his companions. He admired Lyra's calm wisdom, which often provided stability in chaotic situations. Venera's fierce loyalty inspired confidence, even when hope seemed lost. Kayla's brilliance amazed him daily, whether she was repairing damaged equipment or devising clever solutions to environmental puzzles. And Tessa's playful spirit kept morale high, proving that joy could thrive even in the darkest places. One evening, as they huddled around a small fire fueled by dried alien moss, Ethan reflected on how much had changed since their crash landing. Back then, he saw himself as nothing more than a mechanic, an ordinary man thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Now, however, he realized he'd become something greater, a leader. "You've done so much for us," Lyra said softly, her golden eyes meeting his. She reached out and placed a cool hand over his. "Without you, we wouldn't have made it this far." Venera grunted in agreement, though her usual stern demeanor softened slightly. "You fight like one of us now," she admitted, her green eyes gleaming with respect. "Not bad for a human." Kayla smiled shyly, holding up a repaired scanner she'd been working on. "And you understand things no one else does," she added. Your creativity. It's rare. Even Tessa chimed in, shifting into a glowing heart shape before dissolving into giggles. You're fun too, she teased, earning laughter from the group. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. For so long, he doubted his worth, believing he was just an average engineer doing his job. But here, among these incredible beings, he discovered strengths he never knew he possessed. Strengths born not from power or skill, but from compassion and determination. As the fire crackled softly in the background, Ethan looked at each of his companions in turn. We're not just surviving because of me, he said finally, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling within him. It's because of all of us. Together, we can face whatever comes next. His words hung in the air, resonating deeply with everyone present. In that moment, they weren't just a disparate group of survivors. They were a team bound by trust, resilience, and shared purpose. Whatever dangers lay ahead, they would face them side by side. But the looming threat of the Dominion still cast a shadow over their fragile peace. As the fire died down, and the stars twinkled coldly above, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that their trials were far from over. The days on the moon grew longer, both in length and weight. The group had settled into a rhythm of survival, balancing their efforts to stay alive with moments of quiet reflection. Ethan continued to lead them with steady determination, his presence anchoring the team through each challenge they faced. But beneath the surface of their unity, emotions began to simmer, feelings that none of them had fully acknowledged until now. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Lyra, the graceful aquatic alien, often lingered near Ethan during their nightly gatherings around the fire. Her telepathic connection with him deepened, allowing her to share not just memories but fragments of her soul. She admired his selflessness, how he always put others before himself, even when it meant risking his own safety. In turn, Ethan found comfort in her calm wisdom, her ability to soothe fears and offer clarity in moments of chaos. Venara, the fierce warrior, expressed her admiration differently. Where Lyra was gentle and introspective, Venera was bold and direct. She frequently praised Ethan's courage, especially after he single-handedly distracted a pack of predators while the others escaped. "You fight like one of us," she'd said more than once, her tone filled with gruff respect. Yet there were softer moments too, times when she'd catch herself watching him from afar, her green eyes lingering just a second too long. Kayla, ever the brilliant scientist, channeled her affection into collaboration. She loved nothing more than working alongside Ethan, brainstorming solutions to problems or tinkering with salvaged equipment. Their shared passion for discovery created an unspoken bond, one that went beyond words. When Ethan praised her ingenuity, Kayla's bioluminescent patterns would flare brightly, betraying her delight. And then there was Tessa, the playful shapeshifter whose feelings bubbled over in bursts of creativity and humor. She delighted in transforming into shapes inspired by Ethan, a glowing replica of his face, a miniature version of him holding tools, even a swirling cloud shaped like his silhouette. Though her antics often made him laugh, there was a deeper sincerity behind her actions. She cherished his kindness, the way he accepted her unpredictable nature without judgment. One evening, as the group sat together under the pale light of the moon's twin suns, tensions came to a head. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across their faces. Lyra was the first to speak, her voice soft yet resolute. Placing a hand gently on Ethan's arm, she projected images of gratitude and admiration into his mind. "Ethan," she began, her golden eyes shining with emotion, "you've shown me what true compassion looks like. I would be honored to spend my life with you." The air seemed to still as her words hung in the silence. Ethan blinked, stunned by the sudden declaration. Before he could respond, Venera spoke up, her voice firm and unyielding. "I don't waste words," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. "But I won't let anyone else have you. You're brave, strong, and worthy of respect. Marry me." Kayla gasped softly at Venera's bluntness, her glowing patterns pulsing nervously. Gathering her courage, she leaned forward, her large almond-shaped eyes locking onto Ethan's. "You see beauty in knowledge and creation," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "With you, I feel understood in ways I never thought possible. Please, choose me." Finally, Tessa floated closer, shifting into a radiant heart shape that hovered between them. "You make me laugh and feel safe," she said, her voice lilting with warmth. "No matter what form I take, you always accept me. That means everything." For a moment, no one moved. The weight of their declarations pressed heavily on Ethan, who stared at each of them in turn, overwhelmed by their sincerity. He cared deeply for all four of them, not just as companions, but as individuals who had come to mean so much to him. How could he possibly choose? As the night wore on, tension began to build among the aliens themselves. Lyra's serene demeanor faltered as she glanced at Venara, whose scowl deepened with every passing second. Kayla fidgeted anxiously, her glowing patterns flickering erratically, while Tessa shifted restlessly between forms, unsure how to ease the growing discord. "I'm not letting anyone take him away," Venara growled, her crimson scales bristling defensively. "He belongs with me. He saved us all." Lyra countered, her telepathic voice tinged with frustration. "That makes him part of all our lives, and he understands me like no one else does." Kayla added, her voice rising slightly. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at Ethan. "How can you ask me to step aside?" Tessa transformed into a shimmering orb, floating between them as if trying to mediate. "This isn't about ownership," she said softly. "It's about love. Can't we find a way to share?" Their arguments echoed into the night, each alien pouring out their insecurities and desires. Ethan listened silently, his heart aching at the sight of their pain. They weren't fighting because they hated one another. They were fighting because they loved him, and the thought of losing him was unbearable. Finally, unable to bear the tension any longer, Ethan stood up, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Stop," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "All of you are incredible, and I care about each of you more than I can say. But this isn't about choosing one over the others. It's about finding a way forward, together." His words brought a fragile calm to the group. Slowly, the anger and jealousy subsided, replaced by uncertainty and hope. For the first time, they realized their bond wasn't just with Ethan. It was with each other too. If they truly wanted to honor their feelings, they would need to work as a unit, not competitors. As the fire burned low, Ethan sat back down, surrounded by the four aliens who had come to trust him completely. They may not have solved everything yet, but one thing was clear: their journey was far from over. And whatever happened next, they would face it side by side. The fire had burned down to embers, casting faint orange glows across the faces of Ethan and his four companions. The night was quiet now, save for the occasional rustle of glowing vegetation in the breeze. Though emotions still simmered beneath the surface, the group had reached a tentative truce after Ethan's impassioned plea for unity. But as dawn approached, it became clear that their situation required more than just words. They needed a plan. Ethan sat cross-legged on the ground, his mind racing. He couldn't ignore the depth of the aliens' feelings for him, nor could he dismiss the bond they were beginning to form with one another. What they needed wasn't division or competition. It was a way to move forward together, blending their strengths into something greater than the sum of its parts. Inspiration struck him suddenly, sparked by memories of Earth's history and humanity's struggles to unite diverse cultures under shared goals. "I've been thinking," Ethan began, breaking the silence. His voice was calm but firm, drawing everyone's attention. "On my planet, there are countless stories of people coming together despite their differences. Sometimes it takes compromise. Other times, it takes creativity. But what matters most is finding a solution that works for everyone." Lyra tilted her head curiously, her golden eyes reflecting the soft glow of the dying fire. "What do you suggest?" she asked telepathically, her thoughts tinged with cautious optimism. Ethan took a deep breath before continuing. Instead of choosing one partner or competing against each other, we build something new, something unique to all of us. He gestured around the circle, meeting each alien's gaze in turn. We don't have to follow traditional ideas of relationships or families. We can create our own path, one where we all contribute equally, using our individual talents to support one another. Venera frowned slightly. Her arms crossed over her chest. You mean, sharing you? Not just me, Ethan clarified quickly. Sharing everything. Our skills, our knowledge, our experiences. Together, we're stronger than any of us alone. Think about it. Lyra's wisdom keeps us grounded. Venera's strength protects us. Kayla's intelligence solves problems we'd never figure out on our own. And Tessa's adaptability helps us navigate challenges we couldn't predict. Kayla's bioluminescent patterns brightened slightly as she processed his words. Like a collective family, she murmured, her voice filled with wonder. Where no one is excluded. Tessa floated closer, shifting into a shimmering orb of light. It sounds beautiful, she said softly, her tone brimming with hope. But will it work? Can we really set aside jealousy and pride? It won't be easy, Ethan admitted. There will be moments when doubt creeps in, when old feelings resurface. But if we commit to working through those challenges together, I believe we can make it work. Lyra placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder, projecting waves of reassurance into his mind. Your idea honors us all, she said. It shows respect for who we are and who we can become. Venera hesitated for a moment longer, her green eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Finally, she nodded slowly. If this is what you want, human, then I'll try. But don't expect me to back down if someone tries to hurt you, or them. Her protective tone drew a smile from Ethan. I wouldn't expect anything less. With the framework of their unconventional arrangements settled, the group turned their focus to practical matters. They couldn't stay hidden on the moon forever. The Dominion would eventually track them down. If they wanted to survive, they needed a way off-world, and allies willing to stand against the oppressive empire. We need to repair the shuttle, Kayla suggested, pulling out a small data pad she'd salvaged during their escape, and upgrade it while we're at it. Combine human and alien technology to make it faster, stealthier, and better equipped for long journeys. Ethan nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly what we'll do. Kayla, you and I can handle the technical side. Venera, your combat training will help us fortify the ship's defenses. Lyra, your telepathy might let us communicate with potential allies without relying on language barriers. And Tessa, he turned to the shapeshifter, whose form shifted playfully between shapes. You'll be our wild card. Whether it's sneaking past guards or adapting to unexpected threats, your abilities will give us an edge. Tessa grinned, transforming briefly into a miniature version of the shuttle before dissolving into giggles. I like being the wild card. Over the next several days, the group threw themselves into the task of rebuilding their vessel. Ethan and Kayla worked tirelessly in the shuttle's cramped interior, rewiring systems, and integrating alien components scavenged from the crashed ship. Venera reinforced the hull with salvaged metal and crafted makeshift weapons from spare parts. Lyra used her telepathic connection with nearby wildlife to locate useful resources, such as rare minerals embedded in crystalline formations. Meanwhile, Tessa scouted ahead, her ever-changing forms allowing her to slip through tight spaces and gather intelligence on potential dangers. Despite the physical demands of their work, the atmosphere among the group improved dramatically. The initial tension gave way to camaraderie as they collaborated on tasks, each alien contributing their unique strengths. Laughter replaced arguments, and moments of vulnerability brought them closer together. When Venera accidentally damaged a critical component during repairs, Ethan didn't scold her. He simply handed her a tool and showed her how to fix it. In return, she offered a rare smile, her gratitude evident even without words. As the shuttle neared completion, The group gathered once more around the fire, their reflections flickering in the flames. The craft gleamed faintly under the moonlight, a testament to their combined efforts. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was theirs. "We're ready," Ethan announced, his voice steady with resolve. "This ship will take us beyond the moon, toward allies who can help us fight back against the Dominion. But remember, wherever we go together." The aliens exchanged glances, their expressions filled with determination. For the first time since their crash landing, they felt truly united, not just as survivors, but as a family bound by trust, purpose, and love. Yet even as they prepared to leave the safety of the valley, the shadow of the Dominion loomed large. Their journey ahead would test every ounce of courage and ingenuity they possessed. But armed with their newfound unity, they faced the unknown with unwavering hope. The hybrid shuttle roared to life, its engines humming with a blend of human and alien technology. Ethan stood at the helm, his hand steady on the controls as he guided the craft into the moon's dark sky. Behind him, the four aliens sat together, their glowing forms casting soft light across the cramped interior. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, hope filled the air like a tangible presence. As they ascended higher, the crystalline formations of the moon's surface shrank below them, replaced by the vast expanse of space. Stars glittered endlessly against the black void, each one a reminder of how small they were in the grand scheme of the universe. Yet instead of feeling insignificant, Ethan felt empowered. These beings beside him, Lyra, Vinara, Kayla, and Tessa, had become his family. Together, they weren't just surviving, they were thriving. Arlen raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. After a moment, he nodded. "You make a good point, human. Tell me your story." Over the next several hours, Ethan recounted everything. The crash landing, the Dominion's pursuit, and the unconventional bond they had forged along the way. By the time he finished, Arlen's expression had softened. "You've already done what many believe is impossible," he said finally. "If you're willing to join us, you'll have our support." Cheers erupted from the gathered rebels, and for the first time in months, Ethan allowed himself to relax. They weren't alone anymore. They had allies. In the days that followed, Ethan and his companions integrated seamlessly into the coalition. Their unique skills proved invaluable. Lyra's telepathy facilitated communication between disparate groups. Vinara trained recruits in combat tactics. Kayla contributed groundbreaking innovations to their technology, and Tessa acted as both scout and morale booster. As for Ethan, he became a symbol of hope, a human who had bridged gaps others thought unbridgeable. Together, they prepared for the fight of their lives. The Dominion loomed larger than ever, its forces amassing for a final assault on rebel strongholds. But the coalition stood ready, bolstered by newfound unity and purpose. On the eve of battle, Ethan stood with his companions on the observation deck of the flagship, gazing out at the stars. "No matter what happens tomorrow," he said softly, "we've already won. We've shown that love, cooperation, and understanding can transcend even the vastness of space." Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, her golden eyes shining with pride. Vinara gave a rare smile, her green eyes gleaming with determination. Kayla nodded, her glowing pattern steady and bright. And Tessa shifted into a radiant heart shape, floating gently between them. They were no longer just survivors, they were warriors, united by bonds stronger than any empire could break. As the countdown to battle began, they faced the future side by side, ready to carve a brighter path for themselves and for all who dared to dream of freedom.